There is a part of every human being that remains hidden, not only from the world, but often from the self. It is the part we deny, the impulses we judge, the traits we disown. It lurks not in the darkness of night, but in the quiet corners of our own psyche. And though we rarely speak of it, it speaks through us, in our fears, our projections, our judgments, and our compulsions. This is the shadow, the unseen side of the self. The shadow is not evil by nature. It is simply that which we have not yet acknowledged. It may contain rage we are afraid to feel, desires we consider unacceptable, or weaknesses we work endlessly to hide. It forms gradually as we grow, shaped by family, culture, and personal experience. In our efforts to be good, accepted, or loved, we push parts of ourselves into the unconscious. But they do not disappear. They wait, and in that waiting they gain power. We are taught to fear the shadow, to keep it buried. Yet what we avoid does not vanish. It distorts. It leaks out in unexpected moments, through envy, criticism, addiction, or sudden emotional outbursts. What we do not accept in ourselves, we often project onto others. We see in them the very qualities we are unwilling to admit reside within us. This creates a world of mirrors where we react not to reality, but to our own denied reflection. To heal, we must first turn inward, not with blame or shame, but with curiosity and courage. The journey of transformation begins when we stop running from the shadow and instead face it. We begin to ask, what am I afraid to see in myself? And why do I react so strongly to certain people or situations? These are not easy questions, but they are necessary ones. Through honest reflection, we begin to recognize that what we've pushed away may contain important truths about who we are. The paradox is this: the very qualities we fear may also hold our greatest gifts. A person who suppresses anger may be hiding a powerful capacity for assertiveness and boundary setting. Someone who denies their vulnerability may also be cutting off their capacity for deep connection. When we integrate the shadow, not by acting out its impulses but by understanding them, we become more whole. We reclaim the parts of ourselves that were once lost, and in doing so, we gain strength. This process is not about becoming perfect, it is about becoming real. The integrated self is not one who has eliminated darkness, but one who has brought it into conscious dialogue with the light. Wholeness includes contradiction. We can be both strong and afraid, compassionate and angry, confident and uncertain. Integration gives us access to a fuller range of emotion, intuition, and purpose. And it is in this confrontation with the shadow that many discover a profound sense of direction. Our purpose is not always found in our talents or ambitions, but in the wounds we carry, the truths we avoid, the emotions we suppress. The very thing we resist may hold the insight that transforms our path. The fear is the gatekeeper of growth. What we dare to face becomes the fuel for our evolution. So the shadow is not the enemy, it is the unlived potential of the self, disguised in darkness. To fear it is to fear our own power, but to face it gently, honestly, and with intention is to reclaim that power. And in doing so, we begin to live not from a place of fragmentation, but from authenticity and alignment. Because sometimes the path to purpose does not begin with light. It begins with the courage to step into the dark and listen. The idea that each person carries a shadow within them may seem abstract, but it is one of the most concrete and impactful realities of the human psyche. The shadow, consists of the parts of ourselves that we reject, deny, or are unaware of. These aspects are not inherently negative or harmful. They become shadow because we judge them as incompatible with our self-image or with the norms of the society around us. For example, a child who is repeatedly told not to express anger might learn to suppress that emotion entirely, eventually becoming unaware of their own capacity for rage. That anger doesn't disappear. It gets stored, hidden in the unconscious, and it forms part of the shadow self. The development of the shadow begins early in life. As children, we are highly attuned to what is rewarded and what is punished. In order to survive socially and emotionally, we begin to cut away pieces of ourselves that others disapprove of. If a child is ridiculed for being too sensitive, they may bury their emotional responsiveness. If a teenager is rejected for being outspoken, they might suppress their voice and opinions. This process continues over time, shaping what we consciously identify with and what we repress. But repressing these traits doesn't remove them. Instead, they live on in the unconscious and manifest in indirect ways. The shadow often reveals itself through emotional reactivity. When we have disproportionate emotional responses, intense anger, jealousy, or disgust, it can be a signal that the shadow has been triggered. These reactions are not about the external situation alone, but about something unresolved within us. What we find intolerable in others may be a reflection of what we find intolerable in ourselves. Take, for instance, someone who is always criticizing others for being selfish. That criticism might come from a deeply buried part of them that also has selfish desires, needs for independence, boundaries, or attention that they've learned to repress. They project that denied part of themselves onto others, attacking in them what they cannot accept in themselves. This is known as psychological projection, a defense mechanism in which the ego avoids acknowledging the shadow by attributing it to the outside world. The shadow also shows up in dreams, slips of the tongue, irrational fears, compulsive behaviors, and even our sense of humor. We joke about what we're afraid to admit. We dream about what we cannot face while awake. And we unconsciously repeat patterns, relational conflicts, self-sabotage, cycles of guilt that stem from unintegrated parts of the self. These are not just accidents or flaws. They are messages. The psyche is always trying to bring us back to wholeness, and the shadow is part of that call. Importantly, the shadow is not limited to what we might consider negative qualities. It also contains traits that are positive but were discouraged or repressed. A person who was raised in an environment where humility was prized may have buried their ambition. Someone who was taught that vulnerability is weakness may hide their sensitivity and empathy. These capacities remain in the shadow not because they are harmful, but because they were deemed unacceptable in a certain context. When we repress them, we cut ourselves off from parts of our full potential. The more unaware we are of the shadow, the more power it has over us. We become prisoners of patterns we don't understand. Relationships suffer, careers stall, and inner conflicts deepen. We may feel like we're stuck, or that something is missing, but we can't quite name it. This is often the shadow at work, pulling the strings from beneath consciousness. What is most dangerous is not what we know about ourselves, but what we don't. Ignorance of the shadow can lead to destructive behavior, not because we are bad people, but because we are unbalanced people, disconnected from our full psychological truth. The process of engaging with the shadow begins with awareness. It requires a willingness to look at ourselves honestly, not just at our strengths, but at our contradictions. It asks us to explore our triggers and patterns, to examine our judgments, and to reflect on the parts of ourselves we have hidden. This is not easy work. It can be emotionally painful and intellectually uncomfortable, but it is also deeply freeing. The more we understand our shadow, the more agency we gain in our lives. Recognizing the shadow is not about indulging every impulse or justifying harmful behavior. It is about acknowledging that we are complex beings. Every quality within us has a reason for being there. Anger can be a signal of injustice. Fear can be a sign of care. Even traits like arrogance or envy may carry a deeper need to be seen, to be validated, to feel enough. When we uncover the root of these qualities, we gain insight into our unmet needs and unconscious wounds. The goal is not to destroy the shadow, but to integrate it. Integration means developing a conscious relationship with the shadow. It means bringing what is unconscious into awareness and learning how to live with it in a balanced way. This leads to greater psychological maturity, deeper relationships, and a stronger sense of identity. We become more resilient because we are no longer battling against ourselves. We become more authentic because we are no longer hiding. In many ways, the shadow is a teacher. It shows us where we have been wounded, where we are afraid, and where we are unfinished. It points us toward the places that need healing and transformation. When we fear the shadow, we remain stuck in illusion. When we confront it, we begin to grow. It takes courage to turn inward, to face the unknown within, but it is in that inward turn that true strength is born. The shadow you fear is not your enemy. It is the part of you waiting to be known, and the more willing you are to meet it, the more power you will have to shape your life from a place of depth, clarity, and purpose. What lies hidden is not a flaw, but a doorway, and through that doorway, transformation begins. Transformation, at its core, is not about adding something new to who we are. It's about uncovering and reintegrating what has been lost, hidden, or disowned. The path to personal growth often appears daunting not because of external obstacles, but because of the internal confrontation it demands. That confrontation is with the shadow, the aspects of our psyche we have pushed aside because they didn't align with the person we thought we should be. What's most paradoxical, however, is that within the very qualities we fear or reject lies the raw energy of change. The key to transformation, therefore, is not avoidance, but courageous engagement with the shadow. To understand this, we must grasp how the psyche seeks equilibrium. Human consciousness is a dynamic system. It strives for integration. Just as a body reacts to imbalance with pain, fatigue, or illness, the psyche signals imbalance through conflict, anxiety, and emotional unrest. When we ignore the shadow, we create a psychological split. One part of the self, the ego, becomes overdeveloped. It clings to control, perfection, and identity. The other part, the shadow, grows increasingly autonomous and disruptive, trying to be seen in indirect ways, through sudden anger, depression, projection, or irrational fears. This tension between the conscious and unconscious parts of the self creates the necessary conditions for transformation. If we are willing to pay attention, the key realization is this: the shadow is not static. It is alive. It evolves and shifts, and it reacts to the choices we make. The more we deny it, the louder it becomes. The more we listen to it, the more it reveals. Engaging with the shadow means beginning an honest and ongoing dialogue with ourselves. It requires deep introspection, a suspension of judgment, and a willingness to hold complexity. For example, someone who has always seen themselves as kind and selfless might discover within themselves a suppressed resentment or a hunger for validation. Instead of pushing that discovery away as wrong, they can ask, "What is this feeling trying to teach me? Where did it begin? What do I need that I've been too afraid to claim?" This inquiry is the beginning of transformation, not just surface change, but a reorientation of the entire self. True transformation is not about becoming someone else, it's about becoming whole. And wholeness includes the light and the dark, the conscious and the unconscious. To bring the shadow into awareness is to recover lost parts of the soul, energies, desires, and truths that have been buried under years of conditioning and fear. Transformation also involves a confrontation with personal mythology. Each person carries a narrative about who they are and what their life means. This narrative is often shaped in childhood and reinforced by culture. It tells us what is acceptable, what is achievable, and what is shameful. But the shadow lives in the parts of our story we've been told not to tell, the moments of weakness, confusion, or rebellion. When we examine these hidden narratives, we begin to break the spell of limitation. We realize that much of our suffering comes not from the truth itself, but from our resistance to it, and that resistance consumes vast amounts of psychic energy. When we reclaim this energy by integrating the shadow, we feel more alive. We stop wasting effort pretending, suppressing, or defending ourselves from inner truths. Instead, we redirect that energy toward creativity, love, and purpose. Many of history's greatest thinkers, artists, and leaders were not those who avoided darkness, but those who transmuted it. They faced their inner chaos and used it to fuel vision. This is the alchemy of transformation, turning the base material of suffering into wisdom, strength, and authenticity. One of the most profound shifts occurs when we no longer see the shadow as something to be fixed or healed, but as something to be honored. The parts of ourselves that carry pain or fear are also the parts that hold sensitivity, depth, and potential. A person who once feared confrontation might find, within their shadow, a fierce protector or a powerful voice. A person who struggled with control might uncover, in their hidden self, the capacity to surrender and trust. These discoveries are not accidents. They are the direct result of choosing to face the shadow instead of running from it. Of course, this process is not linear. Transformation does not happen in a straight line. There are regressions, periods of confusion, and even resistance from within. The ego does not relinquish control easily. It often clings to the illusion of certainty and safety. That's why the journey into the shadow demands courage and patience. It may feel like walking through a fog, where everything is unclear, but in that uncertainty lies a vital truth. Transformation is not about certainty. It is about surrendering to what is real. Community and dialogue can play an important role in this process. The shadow often thrives in isolation. When we keep our most vulnerable parts hidden from others, we reinforce the belief that they are shameful or unacceptable. But when we share our inner experiences with those who can hold them with compassion and non-judgment, we begin to see ourselves with new eyes. We realize we are not alone in our contradictions. Others, too, carry shadows, and in recognizing each other's darkness, we create space for collective healing. It's also essential to remember that the goal is not to eradicate the shadow, but to be in relationship with it. The shadow will always be with us because we are human and therefore incomplete. Each new stage of life brings new challenges, and with it, new shadows. Integration is not a final destination, it's a lifelong practice. But with each step, we grow in self-awareness, in empathy, and in purpose. We stop being ruled by unconscious patterns, and we begin to live with intention. Transformation, then, is not about perfection. It is about authenticity. It is about becoming fully ourselves, not in spite of the shadow, but because of it. The shadow shows us where we are still afraid, still divided, still asleep, and when we have the courage to turn toward it, to listen and learn, we awaken. We become not only more whole, but more capable of serving others from a place of truth. The darkness we feared becomes the soil in which the deepest growth takes root, and what once seemed like the end becomes the beginning of a more meaningful and liberated existence. The shadow, once acknowledged and understood, becomes a powerful force for personal clarity and direction. At first glance, the shadow appears only as a source of discomfort, a container for guilt, fear, rage, shame, envy, and all the impulses we have been taught to repress. But hidden within those rejected aspects are deep emotional truths, essential messages about who we are and what we desire. The shadow does not lie to us. In fact, it tells us what we have long tried to ignore. And if we can decode its language, we can uncover a powerful internal compass, one that points directly toward our most meaningful and transformative purpose. This is because the shadow holds the raw material of authenticity. When we deny our anger, for instance, we may also be suppressing our sense of injustice, our passion, or our drive to create change. When we suppress fear, we might be blocking off caution, discernment, or the instinct to protect something sacred. Every disowned part contains within it a truth about what we value, whether it be safety, love, autonomy, respect, or purpose. By exploring our shadow with curiosity instead of judgment, we come into contact with these buried values. And values, once uncovered, provide a strong foundation for a life of intention. The process of transformation begins when we start to shift from reacting unconsciously to living consciously. Most of the time, we operate on learned behaviors, conditioned responses, and internalized scripts. We think we are choosing freely, but in truth, many of our choices are being driven by unresolved shadow material, old wounds, unexamined fears, or unmet needs. When we ignore the shadow, we give it silent control over our action. But once we bring it into the light of awareness, we can begin to respond from a place of clarity and depth. The hidden motivations behind our actions become visible, and we are no longer held hostage by them. This shift in awareness brings a renewed sense of direction. What once seemed like chaos or confusion begins to feel meaningful. The moments that hurt the most, the failures, the betrayals, the regrets, are no longer merely painful. They become instructive. They show us where we are called to heal, what we are meant to protect, and what must be transformed. This is not an intellectual process. It's experiential. It happens when we allow ourselves to sit with our discomfort and ask, "What is this trying to tell me?" Instead of running from the feeling, we trace it to its roots. In that exploration, we often find a purpose waiting to be claimed. Transformation through the shadow is not limited to personal development. It often leads to a desire to contribute, to serve, to create something meaningful for others. This is because, when we integrate our shadow, we become more empathetic. We stop seeing ourselves as either good or bad, successful or failing, and we begin to understand ourselves as whole, complex, and human. That same understanding extends outward. We see the struggle in others, not as weakness, but as an echo of our own. We connect on a deeper level, and in that connection, many people find their calling, whether it's in healing, teaching, creating, building, or simply showing up more fully in their relationships. There is a powerful psychological truth at work here. What we repress in ourselves, we often resist or attack in others. This is known as projection. We see in others what we can't tolerate in ourselves, but when we make peace with our shadow, projection diminishes. We stop needing to control or fix others to feel whole. Instead, we create space for growth, for compassion, for understanding. In that space, we become capable of real, purpose-driven action. We are no longer trying to prove our worth or avoid our pain. We are responding authentically to the needs around us, guided by a deeper sense of why. Often, the very path we are meant to walk is guarded by the aspects of ourselves we fear the most. A person terrified of speaking their truth might discover they are meant to be a voice for others. Someone who feels shame around past mistakes might find a calling in mentoring those who struggle. These are not coincidences. They are examples of the shadow acting as a mirror, showing us what we must confront in order to serve meaningfully. The fear is not a dead end. It's a threshold, and when we cross it, the energy we once spent in avoidance is redirected toward purpose. It's important to emphasize that this process is not about glorifying suffering. The pain carried in the shadow is real. It may be rooted in trauma, loss, or years of silencing. But the work of transformation is about using that pain, not letting it define us, but letting it inform us, letting it show us where the wounds are and what strengths they conceal. For example, someone who has experienced rejection may have developed profound resilience, insight, or compassion. These qualities, born in darkness, are often the foundation of their ability to lead, connect, or inspire. What emerges from this process is not just a clearer sense of direction, but a deep trust in the self. When we know that we can face our own shadow and not be destroyed by it, we no longer live in fear of ourselves. We stop trying to be perfect, and we start trying to be real. That authenticity radiates outward. Others feel it. It draws people toward us, not because we're flawless, but because we're whole. And that wholeness becomes a source of strength and guidance, not only for ourselves, but for everyone we encounter. In a world obsessed with image, success, and surface appearances, the work of shadow integration can feel radical. It asks us to go inward when everything around us says to look outward. But if we want to live a life that's not just impressive, but meaningful, if we want a purpose that lasts beyond achievement or praise, we must be willing to explore what lies beneath. The shadow is not our enemy, it is the unlit path to our most authentic self. And when we follow it, we discover that our deepest fears often conceal our greatest gifts. These gifts, once embraced, point the way to a purpose not rooted in ego, but in essence. A purpose that transforms not only the individual, but the world they touch. Transformation through the shadow is not a sudden leap into enlightenment. It is a slow, often uncomfortable process of inner excavation. The journey toward wholeness requires more than just insight. It requires deliberate action. To transform the shadow into a guiding force, we must engage in practices that help us integrate the disowned parts of ourselves into conscious awareness. This is the heart of shadow work. It is a continual return to what we fear, what we avoid, and what we deny. paired with the commitment to remain present, compassionate, and open. The first practice in this transformation is self-observation. Without judgment, we begin to notice our reactions, especially those that are intense, repetitive, or seem disproportionate to the situation. These reactions often point directly to the shadow. For example, if we find ourselves feeling inexplicable anger in response to a harmless comment, that anger may be rooted in something deeper. Perhaps an old humiliation, a sense of not being heard, or a long-held belief of inadequacy. Rather than suppressing the emotion or projecting it onto others, self-observation allows us to pause and ask, where is this really coming from? That simple question opens the door to understanding. From there, reflection becomes essential. Journaling, dialoguing with the inner self, or working with imagery and dreams can reveal patterns and themes in our emotional life. These methods allow the unconscious to speak in symbolic language. The mind expresses through metaphor what it struggles to say directly. A recurring dream about being chased might symbolize an unresolved fear. A drawing of a caged bird might reveal a longing for freedom. When we reflect in this way, we begin to piece together a map of our inner world. A world where the shadow no longer lurks in darkness, but begins to take form and meaning. The next stage of integration involves compassion. It is not enough to simply see the shadow. We must meet it with kindness. Many of us carry internalized voices of shame and criticism, voices we inherited from family, culture, or past experiences. These voices tell us certain parts of ourselves are unworthy or dangerous. But to truly transform the shadow, we must replace condemnation with curiosity. Instead of saying, I shouldn't feel this way, we can ask, why does this part of me exist? What purpose did it once serve? Even the most destructive behaviors often begin as survival mechanisms. When we understand this, healing begins. Compassion allows the fragmented parts of the self to return home. Importantly, this process also calls for conscious responsibility. Shadow work is not an excuse to act out harmful impulses or justify bad behavior. It is an invitation to take full ownership of how our inner wounds shape our outer world. This means recognizing when we are projecting our pain onto others, blaming, judging, or manipulating because we haven't dealt with our own fear or hurt. It means acknowledging the harm we may have caused while living unconsciously, and then making amends where possible. Responsibility grounds shadow work in integrity. It transforms insight into action and ensures that healing does not remain abstract. In parallel with internal practices, the transformation of shadow also requires external expression. Creativity is a powerful way to give voice to the shadow. Through painting, writing, music, movement, or any form of artistic expression, we allow the unconscious to speak in its own language. These acts are not about performance or perfection. They are about revealing what has been hidden. When we externalize our inner world, we create distance between ourselves and the shadow. We can see it, touch it, and eventually reshape it. Creativity, then, becomes a ritual of integration, a way to process and transform what once overwhelmed us. Community plays a vital role as well. Though shadow work is deeply personal, it is not meant to be done in isolation. Being witnessed by others, especially in safe, supportive environments, validates the experience of confronting our darker sides. Sharing our fears, doubts, or wounds in the presence of compassionate listeners reduces shame and normalizes struggle. We realize we are not alone. In fact, many of the parts we've hidden are parts others carry too. Through mutual vulnerability, community becomes a mirror, reflecting back not only our pain, but our shared humanity. This connection fosters the courage needed to keep going when the work feels too heavy. Spiritual and philosophical frameworks can also support this journey. Across cultures and traditions, myths and archetypes have illustrated the journey into darkness as a necessary step toward awakening. The descent into the underworld, the encounter with the monster, the confrontation with the self. These are not just stories. They are psychological realities. When we situate our struggles within a broader narrative, we gain perspective. We stop seeing our shadow as a personal defect and begin to understand it as part of a larger human journey toward integration and maturity. This archetypal lens reminds us that transformation, while difficult, is not only possible, it is sacred. Finally, patience is perhaps the most crucial practice. There is no final destination in shadow work. The process unfolds over time, in cycles, often returning to familiar themes with new depth. Some days will feel like progress, others will feel like regression, but each step is necessary. Each encounter with the shadow reveals a little more of what we are capable of becoming. We do not rush this journey. We walk it with humility, knowing that transformation is not about becoming someone new, but reclaiming who we've always been beneath the masks. The shadow, once feared and avoided, becomes a source of wisdom. It teaches us what matters, shows us where we've been wounded, and points us toward what we must protect, express, or heal. As we integrate it, we find that our sense of purpose becomes more authentic, not driven by ego or external validation, but by a quiet inner knowing. We begin to live not from fear, but from alignment. And in doing so, we contribute something deeply needed in the world, a presence that is whole, grounded, and real, a self that no longer hides from the dark, but walks confidently through it. Transformed. The shadow is not our enemy, it is our most honest teacher. Within it lies the truth of who we are, stripped of pretense and polished masks. To face the shadow is to step into the very place we once feared, only to discover that the fear was guarding something vital. Our lost strength, our buried creativity, our unclaimed voice. Transformation does not come from denying the darkness, but from walking through it with courage and compassion. When we turn toward what we fear in ourselves, we begin to reclaim our wholeness, and in doing so, we find not just healing, but purpose. The shadow we once resisted becomes the path that leads us home.